Do you think that our government is targeting a single ethnic group, normalizing state violence?
I mean, it's hard to see it any other way. Donald Trump would like nothing more than for us to stay quiet. So we can't give him that.
Welcome to the Jessica Yellin Show, where we connect the dots on world events in ways that are meant to leave you feeling informed, empowered, and ready to act. I am thrilled that my guest today is Senator Alex Padilla. He is the senator from California. He is also somebody local to me. I live in Los Angeles, and he is born and raised in this area, has served in city and state government for his whole life. Also chairs the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration. So there's a lot to cover. Senator Padilla, thank you so much for your time today.
No, Jessica, thank you. Thank you for having me. And great to be with a local celebrity.
Thanks. Go California. So, sir, there's just so much troubling news this morning, and I'd love to start with the Supreme Court ruling on birthright citizenship. If I could ask you about it in two parts, let's leave the judicial part aside for the moment and just start with the substance of birthright citizenship. For anybody watching this who isn't aware, the president had issued an executive order trying to revoke birthright citizenship for the children of undocumented immigrants. Sir, as a person who is the son of two immigrants from Mexico and is the embodiment of the American dream, MIT engineer, U.S. senator, what does it mean to you that our government might actually move to deprive people like you of their constitutional right to be an American?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's pretty scary that we're having to relitigate this, but it's not a shock, it's not a surprise. It's actually very consistent with what Donald Trump has been about and how he's gone about his agenda, not just this term and not just last term. I mean, going back to the day he came down those escalators at Trump Tower to announce his first campaign for president. Uh, for those of us who respect the Constitution and the rule of law, it's crystal clear. It's written into the United States Constitution. If you're born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States, regardless of your parents' status. And the diversity of the country is what's made our country so resilient over the years. Being able to say, well, like myself, my parents came from another country, but in this country, there is an American dream. This is the land of opportunity. Same as if my family had been here, for three, four, five, seven generations. You can trace your descendants back to 1776 and the Mayflower, right? We're all equal in this small d democratic society.
Let me ask you about what's happening here in Los Angeles. We are seeing federal agents who are not identifying themselves, pulling people aside, grabbing them off the streets, throwing them into unmarked cars, sometimes brutalizing them. There's video of all of this. Zip tying kids, pulling guns on women or bystanders who are trying to intervene, all because these people essentially have brown skin. Do you think that our government is targeting a single ethnic group? Um, Normalizing state violence with a paramilitary force in our cities.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see it any other way. And it's not just, what we see on the news. It's not just what's in your social media feed as someone from Los Angeles. Just look around. If the Trump administration was seriously only doing what they said they were going to do, focus on dangerous, violent criminals, there would be no discussion, there would be no debate. But what we see is them targeting so many people that are not dangerous, violent criminals, and the way in which they're doing, like you said, they're masked up, no nothing on their chest, on their back, on their uniform to suggest what agency they're from, if not their name, maybe a badge number, something that local law enforcement is required to do when they're protecting public safety. It is causing fear and terror in so many communities. And, there's a couple of just cruel ironies I have to point out. Number one, this administration uses the talk and the rhetoric of dangerous, violent criminals and the worst of the worst. Yet part of their tactics have been to change policy from prior Democratic and Republican administrations to say, you know what, we're not going to go in with raids in schools.
Right.
in workplaces or in houses of worship. If you're after the worst of the worst, really, you're going to raid churches to find the worst of the worst, or not just schools, but elementary schools. What a cruel irony here. Second, um, you know, I've been trying to get from the department some data points. I'm sure they've captured some dangerous violent criminals. There's no debate, no discussion there. But how many people and who are the non-violent criminals that are being caught up in all this? We're beginning to hear data from, of all entities, the Cato Institute, not exactly a liberal think tank. More than 90% of migrants that have been detained since October, right, the federal fiscal year, more than 90% have no serious criminal conviction. So what we've known anecdotally, we now have some data to support that. And so who are they? It is cooks in restaurants. My father worked as a cook for 40 years in restaurants in Los Angeles. It's people who work in car washes. It's day laborers outside Home Depots and other construction workers. It's farm workers, etc. The cruel irony being at the end of the first Trump administration, at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, these were all sectors of the economy, workers that were deemed essential. So essential during a pandemic, but now they're the target of the detention, deportation without due process efforts of the Trump administration. That's what's
And it's
going on.
it's impacting our local economy. We see US citizens and people with papers also being held in these cells. Um, I'm curious, I'd love to ask an oversight question. As I mentioned, you chair the immigration subcommittee, or you're the ranking Democrat on the immigration subcommittee. Um, I've heard reports, even there are lawsuits that allege some of these guys who are being deputized into ICE, but clearly have no traditional law enforcement training because they're using a level of brutality we do not see from trained law enforcement in America. There's a big question, who are these people? There are lawsuits alleging that they're hired from private contractors, which is illegal. There's also allegations that they are correctional facility officers, that they are bonds bailmen, other people. Have you been able to get any clarity from the administration on who these people are?
Well, you may be shocked to hear that this administration has not been forthcoming with that kind of information. They have not been quick to answer our questions or respond to our requests for information. And so we have some of the same concerns. We've been asking these questions for a long time now, but especially since they really escalated the situation in Los Angeles over the last couple of weeks. Even without talking about the bail bondsmen or the bounty hunters or the private correctional folks, even within the federal government, they have been doing some unprecedented things, redirecting agents from other agencies within the Department of Homeland Security for immigration enforcement when that was not their job, that was not their training, but they're trying to get them to do that. People outside the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, in Los Angeles, the federalization of National Guards to now be part of this, the deployment of United States Marines domestically for immigration enforcement. Marines are trained to fight wars abroad, not to police the streets of Los Angeles or any other American city. So the questions of who it is, their training, et cetera, is important. But also important is, what are we taking them away from?
Right.
Right? Those Marines, if they weren't deployed to Los Angeles, are in charge of some other critical missions, which are now under resourced and creating vulnerabilities for the country. We have to ask those questions too and keep demanding answers of the administration because the people have a right to know.
And you mentioned, what are these troops being taken away from? In the case of the National Guard here in Los Angeles, many of these people would be spending their weekends clearing brush and making sure that California is safer from wildfires than we've experienced recently. So, in multiple ways, these administration's actions are putting people in California at greater risk and around the country. But given that you represent California, I'm curious to ask you what escalation might look like. For example, the White House is stonewalling. It's impossible to get this information. People are being brutalized. Uh, at what point, some state officials have pointed out that California is a donor state. We pay $80 billion more to the federal government than we get back. And some have floated the idea of withholding our tax dollars from the federal government until these policies change. At what point would you support that?
Yeah, I mean, just as a individual, not just as a senator, I wouldn't want to say or do anything that would put people at more risk of being targeted by the Trump administration. If you're going to withhold taxes, then he's going to stick the IRS on you because he'll do anything he can to hurt Californians. We're seeing it over and over and over again. So I think my advice in the interim is we have to stay vocal, right? Some of the questions that you're asking me are the questions I had for Secretary Noem at that press conference a couple of weeks ago in Los Angeles. And we saw how they reacted to me, a senator with a question. As difficult as that experience was, I was uplifted to see so many people in Los Angeles, throughout California, and throughout the country participate on No King's Day that following Saturday. That cannot be a one and done. People who participated, we have to organize the next one. We have to stay vocal, continue to use our voices to push back on this administration. We're seeing the public opinion shift as a result, right? You've seen the polls that I'm hearing about on the news, and I'm sensing a little bit of a pause amongst my colleagues here in the Senate as well. And I think
Republicans?
as public opinion shifts and public engagement continues, you're going to see a political shift of members of Congress and maybe, just maybe, more accountability, bipartisan accountability of this administration.
Bipartisan. I do want to acknowledge what we all saw happen to you at that Christine Nome press conference in your own, terrain, simply asking a question. Uh, Not only were you forcibly held down, but after that, we saw the vice president refer to you as Jose, a member of the Trump family repeat it. That is no accident. That is a deliberate attempt to demean an identity. Um, what do you make of this moment in America? Does that language have echoes of another time? Does the violence we're seeing from the state have echoes of another time? And what fears do you have about where this might lead?
Yeah, well, I mean, sadly, it does. And the fear is because we know we have had those chapters in our state's history and in our nation's history. Look, I've chosen to not respond because I'm not going to debate or argue at that level. It's petty. And just an example of how this administration chooses to conduct themselves. We have some serious challenges in this country, and we should be having thoughtful debates and discussions and putting forward solutions. But instead, they resort to name calling. We're better than that. The people deserve better than that. But here's the hope, because despite the dark chapters we've had in our nation's history, whether slavery once upon a time, the Jim Crow era, more pertinent to today's discussion for California, the mid 90s, right? California was very different then than it is today. What inspired me to pursue public service, to try to engage in politics and government, was Proposition 187 on the ballot in California in the year 1994. I was fresh home from college, right, trying to make my parents proud. I had just received my mechanical engineering degree from MIT, eager to start my career when I saw ads on television, a Republican governor at the time, Pete Wilson, seeking reelection, down to the polls, now scapegoating immigrants, blaming California's economic woes on immigrants and immigrant communities. That was personal to me. I saw my parents do nothing but work hard and sacrifice, trying to provide for my sister, my brother, and I more opportunities, starting with getting a good education. So the good news is you had a lot of people like my parents who had been in the United States as legal residents for decades with no interest in becoming citizens, finally doing so, not just for protection, but so that they could register to vote and participate in democracy. And you had the younger generation at the time. I still feel young. I still think I'm young, but uh, back then, even younger, saying, hey, regardless of your career interest, we have to engage politically as well. And thankfully, California is very different today as a result, not just a leader in so many policy areas, education, healthcare, climate, reproductive rights, but particularly when it comes to embracing immigrants. We're the fourth largest economy in the world, not despite our immigrant population, but because of the contribution of immigrants, yes, as workforce, but also as consumers and as entrepreneurs. That should be something to emulate across the country, not attack.
And California has a long history of being a decade or more ahead of where the country ends up. So a few steps back leads to many steps forward in those cases. I
But
want
it
to,
doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. It happens when people engage and seize those organizing opportunities.
it's a moment to wake people up. I want to switch our conversation for our last moments to talk about one of the larger implications of the birthright ruling from the court today, which is that the Supreme Court tried to tie the hands of federal judges. For folks who aren't aware of this, I'll say quickly the ruling effectively limits the ability of federal judges to impose nationwide injunctions, to sort of say the president has done something unconstitutional, it can't apply anywhere. Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Jackson, wrote that this will lead to our collective demise. I've never seen a Supreme Court justice say something like that. I'm curious, do you agree? And would you comment on some of the specific issues Trump now plans to try and undo? Rules around, he said, sanctuary cities, refugee resettlement, what this will mean for immigrant communities.
Yeah, hugely concerning. I mean, on the question of birthright citizenship and immigration, but more fundamentally, when you have a president issue an executive order that can be harmful, but an injunction only applies in one judicial district, or only amongst maybe plaintiffs or litigants in that particular case, we're going to have uneven application of the law across the country. So, in this matter, a child is only a citizen if you live in a certain state, but not if you live in another. How is that equal protection? Equally alarming for all of us should be the way the Supreme Court has been going about their business is only further empowering, they're incentivizing Donald Trump to seize more and more power. The judiciary is a co-equal branch of government, and they can and should be reining in overreaches, not enabling them. Just like Congress is a separate but co-equal branch of government, we need to rein congressional powers back. The current Republican majority has not been interested in that. They need to wake up too.
There's so many other things. Let me give you one moment to comment on the big, beautiful bill that's working its way through the Senate this weekend. Do you think it will pass? What's your greatest fear if this bill does pass?
Yeah, my greatest fear, and I think some version of it is very, very likely to pass this budget reconciliation process, is a simple majority. So they have the votes once they finish negotiating within themselves. But sadly, the agenda is all too clear. Uh, Cut after cut after cut, you name it. Medicare, access to healthcare, nutrition assistance programs, really programs that seniors rely on, so many children rely on. There's so many cuts in this package. You would think that they're genuine when they say, well, we have to get the nation's debt under control. No, that's not the case. The nation's debt gets worse with this bill. And how can that be if it's all about cuts? It's all about cuts not to address deficit or debt, but to underwrite tax breaks for billionaires. That's who the big winners are if the Republicans have their way. So we have to keep calling it out. Thankfully, they've overreached in this budget reconciliation process as well. They're losing over and over again before the Senate parliamentarian, but they're just going to sharpen their pencils, try to retool their proposals to try to get something done. So the fight is on, and the fight's going to stay on.
Okay. My last question for you, sir, and I'm grateful for your time. You mentioned that it's time for bipartisan action to resist some of Trump's overreach, that the American public needs to stay engaged and those who aren't engaged need to do more. And yet we're also seeing in just the few months that Trump has been in office, this incredible rollback of what we know as our democratic norms. And a lot of people are asking, it's time to escalate. Is there anything more you'd like to see Democratic colleagues do? Is there anything you'd like to call on the public to do? Is it time to consider a general strike? Where is the moment to make good trouble and push this further?
Yeah, and look, Donald Trump would like nothing more than for us to stay quiet and for us to cower and to not want to be part of the pushback. So we can't give him that. We have to continue to stand up and speak up in our own ways. I'm going to continue doing that as a senator, demanding questions, shedding light on what really is going on. My Republican colleagues need to be very well aware that the way the Trump administration has gone into Los Angeles can happen to them too. It happens to be Los Angeles today, and it happens to be about immigrants' rights. But Trump has laid the model for how you can go and squash dissent on any issue in any city in America, and that should be worrisome for Democrats and Republicans and independents, and for the people out there who just feel so overwhelmed about what's going on and maybe feel helpless as a result. No, first of all, you're not alone. Everybody can do something. Write or call your congress member, support an advocacy organization, uh, register a friend, a family member, or a colleague to vote and get ready for next year's midterms. Everybody can do something, and if you think it may be futile, just think about what happened to me. You know, if this administration is this afraid of one senator with a question, imagine how they'll be shaking in their boots when millions of people across the country keep rising up again and again and again. So everybody can do their part. It does make a difference.
Senator, thank you again so much. And if you ever want to get brunch at Blue Jam Cafe or anywhere else, I'm here in LA. I'd love it.
All right, yeah. Next time we'll do this in person. Thank you,
Okay.
Jessica.
Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.